Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this GameTech.com video, we're going to be tackling and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to be starting things out with Team Blue, because Intel have finally acknowledged the security flaws which have been present in the management engine code, which of course is integral to processors Intel have produced over the past several years. Then we're going to move over to AMD, because new processors are arriving, and this is according to Asus, where the company have outed their existence through various BIOS updates through the company's B350 and X370 product lines. So we're going to discuss what this could possibly mean, what type of performance uptick we're going to be getting, and also a whole bunch more besides. But we're going to start things out, as I said, with Intel. So there have been various security researchers which have, of course, been conducting tests to find out how vulnerable the management engine firmware is inside of Intel's CPUs. And this includes Positive Technologies, which is somewhat aptly named, Google themselves, and these companies have not only conducted research to find out how the processors are vulnerable, but they've managed to actually disable the management engine itself. This has led companies such as Google to want to disable the management engine for its servers, for obvious reasons. It doesn't want them to be vulnerable to attackers. Now, do bear in mind, remote vulnerability is something that's not as likely in terms of the difficulty of attack compared to actually being present on the computer itself, with the computer itself, where you can simply plug in a device in USB. And according to an announcement from Positive Technologies, a researcher there, they have achieved, quote, a full takeover of the management engine. Now, they are going to be presenting their findings in the Chaos Computer Club conference, which is going to be taking place in December. Okay, so now we know it's bad. Okay, what are they going to be doing? Well, Intel are announcing fixes for the various processors, and these include, the 6th, 7th, and 8th generation of Intel Core processors, Xeon processors, the E3 1200 V5 and V6, the scalable family of Xeons, the Xeon Processor W family, the Atom C3000, the Apollo Lake Intel Atom Processor E3 900 series, the Apollo Lake Intel Pentium, and finally the Celeron N and J series. So, you may have, of course, these privacy and security concerns, and to help to tell you whether you are vulnerable or not, there is a tool which you can download and then run it on your particular system. Do note that the tool is only going to work on Windows and Linux systems. As I said, it is available to download on Intel's official website, and I'll place a link, of course, in the video description. So, okay, you're vulnerable. What do you do? Well, this is where it becomes a bit trickier. Intel are not going to be fixing the vulnerabilities themselves. That would be too simple. Instead, you're going to need to check with the OEM who have provided you your computer, or alternatively the maker of your motherboard, and basically hope and pray that they release a firmware update to fix these flaws. Of course, that's not particularly ideal, because, for example, the 6th generation of processors, Skylake, is now, well, no longer being produced. So whether a motherboard manufacturer decides to release an update for this is really down to them, because it's not a, it's not a current product. I imagine many of the larger ones will. So, for example, MSI, Asus, you get the picture, because obviously it's good public relations for them to do that. But if you have bought a laptop that's, let's say, 3-4 years old, for example, well, good luck to you, pretty much. With that said, I guess the most logical piece of news is the next one, and that is the new processors from AMD. See, that's a nice segue, isn't it? If you're looking to buy a new system, AMD are looking to be ready to release a new set of processors for AM4. Of course, there's been a plethora of rumours concerning this, but first of all, I'll get into the latest news, and then we could do some analysis. Asus have released a series of BIOS updates for all, just to clarify, every single one of its AMD B350 and X370 chipsets. Both of those, of course, are, for those who don't know, for the AM4 platform, the X370 being the higher end. And the quote is very small, but it does indeed highlight the case for this for this piece of news. It says, and I quote, update to AGESA 10.7.1 for new upcoming processors, end quote. So according to this BIOS, which was dated just a few days ago, that would be the 17th of November 2017, it looks like Asus have either deliberately or accidentally, depending on your perspective, I guess the BIOS release was deliberate, but I don't necessarily know if AMD will be happy about this, let's put it that way. They have let a cat out of a bag. Of course, Intel have been busy little bees themselves recently, and they've actually had issues keeping up with demand for the Copper Lake processors and, of course, the Z370 chipset. And those processors have certainly seen a new Intel, with the fact that, of course, with the 8700K, you have 6 cores, 12 threads. One of the key points that AMD still have in its favour is still the existence of a couple of extra cores on, let's say, the 1700 or above, but Intel do have a single core speed advantage, as we've discussed multiple times, and this does mean that applications which really rely on single thread performance, a lot of games, especially older legacy titles, do tend to favour Intel. So we have several scenarios which of course are possible, and without an official statement from AMD or Asus, and believe me, I don't think we're going to be getting one anytime soon, unfortunately, that just leaves us for speculation. Now, one of the most obvious things that this could be is an APU, which of course would most likely be inclusive of Vega graphics, and let's face it, that would be very similar in premise to the mobile Ryzen APUs. And it's also possible, because there is some evidence, we'll go into that in just a second, that we'll be seeing the fabled Zen Plus processors. In a minute, we're going to discuss 12nm itself and what we could possibly be seeing in terms of performance and architecture changes, assuming this is just going to be a die shrink with Zen in mind. But we will also quickly touch on another piece of news which started to circulate in late September of this year, and that is that motherboard manufacturers are apparently being apprised that there is an updated roadmap with 12nm low-power Pinnacle CPUs which will be taking to store shelves by February 2018. And Ryzen 7 will be succeeded by Pinnacle 7, and then slowly over the month or two we'll see the introduction of Pinnacle 5 and Pinnacle 3, of course the higher number denoting higher performance. And eventually we'll also see the introduction of 400 series motherboards as well, which would include the X470. And supposedly these will be once again built on 12nm. We should still be seeing on this tweaked architecture only 8 Zen cores, but there will be some performance improvements, and we're going to discuss those in just a moment. Back in mid-September of this year, Global Foundries, along with AMD, did of course make the announcement that they are going to be partnering for a new 12nm FinFET technology. I'll read out the quote. The new 12LP technology provides as much as 15% improvement in circuit density and more than 10% improvement in performance over 16/14nm FinFET solutions on the market today. This positions 12LP to be fully competitive with other 12nm FinFET foundry offerings, and the technology leverages GF's, Global Foundries, expertise at Fab 8, where its 14nm FinFET platform has been in high volume production since early 2016, and Mark Papermaster, who is the CTO and Senior Vice President of Technology and Engineering at AMD, has also issued a statement on this. We are pleased to extend our long-standing relationships with Global Foundries as a lead customer for their new 12LP technology. Our deep collaboration with Global Foundries has helped AMD bring a new set of leadership in high-performance products to the market in 2017 using the 14nm FinFET technology. We plan to introduce new clients and graphics products based on GF's 12nm process in 2018 as a part of our focus on accelerating our products and technology movement, end quote. Indeed, there are multiple images that have been doing the rounds on this, and one of the most famous ones is from GTC 2017, which once again was a couple of months ago. And of course, this is credit to Global Foundries, although the Twitter user in question was Patrick Moorhead that actually plopped this on the internet. And it does say, once again, basically repeating what the statement was, up to 15% improvement in circuit density and more than 10% improvement over industry 16nm FinFET solutions, with risk production in the first half of 2018 for highly compelling options for customers, and 12LP production builds on the 14LPP platform in high production since early 2016, pushed rules and new constructs enabled logic area shrinking while minimizing design rework, blah blah. Now, I do recall I actually covered a piece of news back in like July, or around that time anyway, July or August. Mark Papermaster actually did an interview where he was confirming that both Zen 2 and Zen 3 processors will be making the jump to 7nm, and they would also be introducing EUV, and this is also as fast as they can accordingly. And apparently AMD are making good progress with the preparation of 7nm, but according to Papermaster, it was, quote, the design team had to redouble their efforts, and also the toughest lift I've seen in a number of generation. And this was once again in an interview with EE Times. One of the reasons behind that is there was a new requirement for CAD tools for 7nm and a need for, quote, deeper cooperation with Foundries and the electronic design automation industry. And once again, he told EE Times that 7nm is a long node like 28nm, and when you have a long node, it lets you design team focus on microarchitecture and system solutions rather than redesign standard blocks for the next process, end quote. However, in another interview with Tom's Hardware, well, interview is a bit of a strong statement, it was more of a couple of words really. This was once again in September 20th, so essentially the same dates that we've seen these other pieces of news pop up at the Global Foundries Technology Conference. AMD CTO, I'm reading this out verbatim from the article, Mark Papermaster announced that the company will be transitioning graphics and client products from the Global Foundries 12nm LPP FinFET process used today to the 12nm LP process in 2018, and Global Foundries also announced that 12LP will begin production in the first quarter of 2018. The website, Tom's Hardware, did decide to follow up with Papermaster in person, in other words, question him, because there was some questioning what exactly was going to be happening. Because previously AMD had implied, and that's putting it generously, that Zen 2 and its successors would be using the 7nm process. But accordingly, this is where things get a bit tricky, because we don't know 100%. There is some evidence to say one thing and other evidence to say another thing, and obviously a lot of it's, you know, he said, she said at this point, and I don't want to come down on one side or the other because quite honestly it's changing all the time. There is some evidence to say that we're going to be seeing a die shrink of Ryzen, a tick, I guess if you will, or whether the Zen 2 process will also, Zen 2 processor will also be using 12LP as well. As a small aside, Raja Koduri, obviously this is before his departure, also issued a letter to his team, and it was a pretty short quote, but it does say that a new wave of product excitement will be happening in 2018. So this possibly means we'll be seeing new Vega GPUs based on 12nm LP, which obviously, if you start taking the facts and figures which are being touted by the actual documentation of Global Foundries marketing around 12LP, well, 15% circuit density, that means essentially the node, the silicon, can be shrunk between 10 and 15%. However, the 10% improvement over industry standard 16nm FinFET, this means that in theory at least we should be seeing a nice performance uptick. How much, of course, really depends on multiple factors, but typically Global Foundries manufacturing processes have slightly lagged behind their competitors, and that's just kind of been well known and well established in the industry. But it is saying more than 10%. However, this is up against the 16nm FinFET, so I'm just going to say that it has about 10% improvement in performance. Now, improvement in performance, of course, means clock speeds and perhaps power consumption and the other usual caveats. So if we see that based upon the current clock speeds of, let's say, the 1800X or whatever, that means in theory we're going to see between 4 and 4.4 gigahertz, depending on whether we're referring to base or boost clock. And one final thing, while I am on this particular subject, there are a couple of other small things to take into consideration. Whether this shrink is going to improve the actual performance of the processor based upon other small tweaks. I don't think we're going to see, for example, improvements to cache size or, branch prediction or anything like that. It's possible, maybe a slight tweak here or there. But one thing I do feel we're going to see is improvements to precision boosting and the way the processor handles that. So this information I'm getting from AnandTech. This, of course, I actually remember from when I was covering all this whole Ryzen mobile thing. So AMD APUs, of course, have not only the Zen cores, but a slightly tweaked version, but also on top of that it has Vega. I'm going to ignore Vega for this particular part of the video and talk instead about Precision Boost 2 and Mobile XFR. So Precision Boost works very simply. It basically senses what the processor is currently doing and will aim to run the clock speed of that CPU or CPU cores as high as possible. However, there are some weaknesses for it, and with Ryzen Mobile, AMD are utilizing a new model. So if it's in P0, this basically means the fastest turbo state, the system will use, quote, an opportunistic turbo algorithm that, rather than basing upon the cores under load, is now governed instead by CPU temperatures, currents, and how much load is being applied. So what it will do now is basically utilize all of the environmental inputs it can, such as the sensor's temperatures, battery life, although obviously that's not really so much of a big deal with, desktops, because surprisingly they don't really need a battery. And in theory, what we should see is better turbo frequencies and perhaps better, more consistent performance, especially over larger number of cores. We should see a better, I guess the best word of describing it is a more gradual curve. So rather than a large drop-off in performance, if, for example, you have a single thread, generally it will, of course, run at the highest clock speed. For example, you might, just for sake of argument, if you're looking at, say, Threadripper, you might get it to 4 gigahertz on a single core, but if you're utilizing multiple cores, it might settle around the 3.6, 3.7, or whatever, depending on your, on your particular setup and how you've tweaked it and cooling and all of that stuff. So in theory, this should offer better performance, and it will still be doing this, it will still be altering this on 25 megahertz granularity. So in theory, at least, if you have a couple of one application or a couple of applications which are taxing just 1 or 2 cores. So for example, let's say you're playing a video game, which obviously is notorious for really taxing just a couple of threads. And at that particular time, an application in the background decides, hey, I want to update. What can happen currently on the desktop even is that you can get quite a large drop-off in performance, several hundred megahertz. In theory, with this, you should get more consistent performance. In other words, because those cores aren't being taxed 100%, it might only be like, 10, 15, 20% CPU usage. In theory, it will be better than, what the current system is. And basically the too long didn't read, according to AnandTech, they are saying that the next generation of AMD desktop Ryzen processors, well, the author was told, and I quote, it was inferred as / it's a safe bet, end quote. And this also may lend itself to XFR, mobile XFR, which basically operates very similarly to Precision Boost. Now, obviously in mobile systems, they are generally thermal and battery limited. So for the sake of argument, if you've got a, laptop, you can't have that hooked up to a high-end, AIO or, an entire water cooling loop. And similarly, batteries will obviously drain much faster, so you have to operate within certain TDP power requirements. But most mobile power notebooks will not have XFR. However, certain engineers can certainly do that if they decide to, but they'll have to decide that based upon the chassis of the laptop itself. And AMD explain it that if you were to buy one of the devices which do have MXFR, Rather than the system being designed around 15 watts, it may be instead designed around up to say 25 watts. So this is basically configurable, once again, depending on the vendor you're purchasing it from and how comfortable and confident they are in the actual solution. Now, whether this is going to go into, let's say, oh, I don't know, desktops and how that's going to work, it may mean that the actual TDP, possibly for desktop parts, is going to be a little bit more boisterous, but at the end of the day, we just don't know. So what's the takeaway from this? Well, if we're looking at a die shrunk version of Ryzen, which I personally think we are going to be receiving at some point or another, I don't think it's going to happen at this point. So the most likely scenario, and once again, I don't have, whispers of Lisa Su in my ear telling me this, but it's most likely that these particular BIOS updates are going to be for an APU in the short term. But it is possible that some of the code which is there is also going to be for future die shrink versions of Ryzen, and if that's the case, the most likely scenario is that we're going to be seeing a nice performance uptick. Obviously, it's going to be like, the Ryzen 2s, the new architectures, which are going to bring in sweeping changes to the actual underlying foundation of the processor, and that's pretty much it. But with all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.